This panel is proudly sponsored by Vidyard.
Welcome back to Running Remote Online, stage number 2. My name is Mike. I'm your MC here for part of today. Hope you all enjoyed your break. If you're in Europe, good evening. If you're on the East Coast, then I hope you had a great lunch. And on the West Coast, all of our friends there, good morning. Our next panel is coming to you sponsored by Vidyard. It's the future of meetings, the death of road warriors, and the birth of the remote team. As a travel fan, this one's near and dear to my heart. Vidyard, our sponsor, helps sales teams connect with prospects through all stages of the buying cycle using video. It's the easiest way for reps to record and send video messages to prospects, backed by a powerful video platform that provides detailed analytics on how video is helping your team. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tyler Lessard, who's the VP of Marketing and Chief Video Strategist at Vidyard. Take it away, and I'll see you guys in a little bit with some questions from the audience.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mike, and welcome everyone to this session here on the future of meetings as part of the Running Remote event. As mentioned, my name is Tyler Lessard. I'm the VP Marketing and Chief Video Strategist here at Vidyard, and I've spent the last 7 years of my life here working on video content and video collaboration strategies with businesses across the world, and have seen this incredible evolution of how it is that we can connect and communicate both externally with customers and prospects, as well as internally with colleagues, employees, and coworkers. And of course, this incredible rise over the last 18 months of virtual collaboration, of remote teams, and how tools, not just like video, but like many others that are helping us to embrace this truly remote work world. So in this talk, we're going to dive into a topic that I know we can all relate to, probably far too well, which is meetings. In this remote world, we're all thinking about how do we reinvent how we do the culture of meetings? How do we reduce the number of meetings in our calendars? How do we respect multiple time zones as teams are distributed and working remote? How do we connect with customers and external people and manage those meetings in new ways as we move into this new world? So we're going to dive into all of that, and we're going to walk away from this, hopefully, with a number of interesting new ideas about the future of meetings and some of the things we can start working on today. Now, I have 3 amazing panelists here with me today to explore this topic. I'm going to ask them each to quickly introduce themselves and their organization, and maybe we'll start with yourself, Erik from Hawke Media. Welcome, Erik.
Sure, thanks for having me. Erik Huberman, CEO and founder of Hawke Media. We're basically an outsourced CMO and marketing team to companies. So we go into brands, identify holes in their marketing org, and then can spin up different experts all a la carte month to month. So it could be Facebook marketer, email marketer, web designer, fractional CMO, et cetera. We've got a little over 200 full-time people, and now they're in 30 different states, and we used to be mainly based in Los Angeles. Got rid of our office. In fact, our last rent check is due in a week. So that's been that. And then we also have a venture fund. We invest in marketing technology and a financing arm where we give working capital to companies to grow their marketing as well.
Outstanding. And do you work with clients largely in North America? Do you work globally?
Globally. We've got a team in China. We got a team in the Philippines. We have clients in Europe. We have clients obviously all over North America as well. A few in South America too.
Fantastic. So a distributed client base and now also a distributed employee base. Time zones everywhere around the world, which must make meetings a lot of fun in your business. Yeah. All right. We'll pass it over to you, Gene.
Hey, I'm Gene Podolyak. I'm co-founder of Remeet.com. And we are a tool that kind of tries to fix one of the biggest problems with meetings. It's like overloaded calendars and all the distractions by meetings. And we are focused fully on distributed teams from the start. We started a couple of years ago, way before the pandemic. And so we are making some progress in that direction. And I hope we will talk more about that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you as part of this, Gene. We'll talk a bit about your previous experience at your past organization, and then I'm actually excited to dive into some of the things you're working on at Remeet, because I think some of the ideas you have about reinventing, not just reacting, but really adapting to how we manage meetings in this distributed world, I think are super interesting. And I think will actually set the stage for a lot of the evolution and innovation we'll see in the next few years. So great to have you here. And finally, we have Rahul from Designhill. Rahul, welcome.
Thank you, Tyler. It's a pleasure to be here. And so we at Designhill, we're a freelancing platform, one of the largest creative marketplaces. We basically do everything from design to print. We have crowdsourcing platforms, free tools. We do design to print in terms of merchandise. Can you guys hear me? Because sorry, the screen's froze. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a team of more than 130. In fact, we probably we are one of the early advocates of remote work, because being a freelancing platform, we have a global customer base. 95% of our customers are from US, Canada, Australia, UK. We have a community of more than 500,000 creative professionals, designers, artists from over 120 countries. So that's what we do. And remote working is something that we've been sort of adopting for a very long time, and it's just the whole whatever has happened in the last year, it's just accelerated the entire process now. And so that's it.
Terrific. You've been doing remote distributed work and virtual meetings before it was cool for the rest of us. So I'm excited to hear what you've learned over the years. And you've also got an interesting new project, Mission Oxygen, that I hope to talk about, and what you've learned there of actually building a distributed team and distributed business in just a matter of a few weeks. So excited to talk about that. So let's jump right into it. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists here to talk a little bit about the kind of culture of meetings traditionally in their organizations, and then let's talk about how things have evolved over the last little bit, so we can all have some perspective on what other businesses have seen in terms of the transition through the virtual world. So Erik, I'm going to start with yourself on the top left of my screen here. And so I want to take a little bit of a step back, going a couple of years. You mentioned that your organization was traditionally in the office. You were tight-knit teams working together. Can you talk a little bit about the culture of the company and that physical office environment, and sort of how you would typically approach or think about the culture of meetings in that world? Was everything in person? Were you already doing virtual? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our clients are mostly remote, meaning like we weren't on site with our clients. So all those meetings were virtual. So we were using Google Hangouts and Zoom for the entirety of the business. In terms of ourselves, we had meetings that were sort of standard regular meetings to make sure that our executive team touches base every other week, or that each team gets to meet with each other. We had daily stand-ups to make sure that they're learning from each other, et cetera. So there was a lot of intentional meetings to make sure that we wouldn't leave too much to serendipity, but then a lot of it was serendipity. And that's where I think people value the nuance of office is, if I'm sitting here and I had a question for my CFO, I can just walk down and ask them. If two people are having trouble with an account, they can talk to the person next to them and get some help. So there was that, sort of, again, just impulse side of meetings where it wasn't like scheduled on the calendar meetings, but we could just go chat with each other real quick and get accomplished that way. So I'd say that was a big part of the culture is, I'd have a free half hour. I'd go figure out which executive I want to just go brainstorm with for 30 minutes, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because there's that in-office environment of not just the meetings, but also the conversations, the relationship building, which I think in many cases is probably an even more important part of the in-office experience than the meetings themselves, right? Yep. As you look back, Erik, and you think about the way that meetings used to be planned and done in your business, and then as you sort of shifted over the course of the last year, can you look back and think about anything where you recognize now, like, oh, you know what? Maybe that wasn't the most efficient or best way to do it, or what do you think about that?
So yeah, I was answering your question directly, but absolutely. So to highlight, I think that we overvalue that nuance and that serendipity and that impulse meeting. I think that people think that there's so much to be valued by the water cooler conversation. You start to realize, no, that was just a waste of time. Like, it was actually not that productive. It wasn't that intentional. And because you had the opportunity to go talk to people are social, by nature, they're going to go talk to people. And now that you have to be more intentional with everything, a few things have happened. One, we still have all the meetings that we used to have that are important, that are like, hey, we need to make sure that we touch base as a leadership team every other week. We need to make sure that every team, we actually have a daily stand-up on every team every morning so that people generally start their day together, that they can all touch base. And the people that are across the world that can't make those meetings, we record it for them to listen to when they start their day so they know what's going on. It's kind of like a public service announcement kind of thing for the individual teams, trainings, things like that they can go through. So that's been very beneficial. It's a little more disciplined. And then all the nuanced stuff, you realize that like a couple things happen there. One, a lot of those are a complete waste of time. And if you didn't have the option of just walking down and talking, you just wouldn't have had that meeting at all, but you end up wasting each other's time chatting through something that really doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Two, all this stuff that there's a lot of things that we just assumed would happen through that nuance, that someone would join a team and just through being at the table, they'll start to learn. And you're going to, through those little meetings, I'd go meet with, go stop by my CFO's office and ask him about a few finance things and then move on. I didn't have a regular meeting with my CFO because I saw him all the time. Why do I need another thing on the calendar? Now, That's not the case. We have a regular thing on the calendar, which means every, couple weeks, I'm strategizing financially with him that I wouldn't do that normally. So it forced a lot of proactiveness as far as my calendar that's made it actually way more productive. And then what I'd say to the question about like people in time zones and spread out all over, with flexibility comes flexibility. It's kind of a two-way street. Like I also have a lot of employees that will have a break in the middle of the day and go hit the beach for 2 hours. So like if you, I think that's great. That's not an issue with me, but you might have to also get on a call at 8 p.m. Like it's that balance of like, if you want a flexible working environment, you need to be flexible too. And I think for the right people, that's a godsend. For me, I love it. You can work wherever now at this company. I've spent months at different places throughout the past year that are not my home turf of LA just because it made no difference. Like you can work wherever. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And again, I literally didn't miss a beat because I still have all those meetings that I need to have. We haven't wasted as much time as we used to on BS meetings. So it's been good.
I love that, the intentionality of those meetings now and being disciplined about that, which is, I think, a really interesting output from it. You're right. I found the same thing in my own team, which used to rely on just the odd conversation. And now I'm like booking a short one-to-one with different people on my team on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And that's actually been more effective than the old just, every once in a while. And some people you realize, hey, we hadn't actually chatted in a month. There were a lot of things that we might have missed. So, Gene, would you mind talking a little bit about your experience prior to Remeet in your organization, how your team was, your engineering team was built, and how you managed the kind of remote meeting world or in-person meeting world prior to your life at Remeet?
Yeah, and we started. We started as I said, we started Remeet way before the pandemic. So my previous job was before the pandemic as well, and we were pretty much hybrid. With a bunch of people, like we had like 10 locations. So it's pretty much like, and we were remote, and we were trying to implement all the remote first best practices. But the challenge was always like we have only a couple of hours on the intersection of time zone, and those hours were always blocked with something like weekly project X, weekly project Y, DevOps weekly meeting, UX weekly meeting, and then all this bunch of one-on-ones that also need to be put somewhere. So the biggest challenge was that, like, when I need like something spontaneous, like I had to, like, it was very hard to book it, and I had to ping someone on Slack, and it was always like hard to do. And we always ended up like creating conflict, skipping all these meetings, and yeah, that was kind of the biggest challenge for us. We kind of like started thinking about it a while ago, and are trying, like, this is how we kind of came to Remeet idea, because like with most of these weekly meetings, you only need it like for maybe one of the topics once in a while, especially for people who are in a leadership role. So, and you cannot be in two places at the same time with traditional meetings. So the idea was like, why can't we, like, why do we have to schedule meetings? Why don't we schedule all the individual topics? So we basically eliminated this concept of weekly meeting on something and with agenda, and you basically, when you have an agenda topic, you create it and it's scheduled, and it basically decongests calendars very significantly, and created a tool that basically optimizes that for the teams.
Yeah, it's super interesting. There's a lot of discussion these days as we go through this. We'll touch on it as well. Of there's like, how do we have better meetings in a remote world, but also how do we reduce the amount of time spent in meetings, or how do we kind of repurpose parts of the meeting and turn those into asynchronous activities so that we're all more efficient and effective. I think you've got some interesting ideas there. And, here at Vidyard, one of the things we started doing was, anytime there was a meeting that would have some kind of, part of it was often a presentation of information, right? You'd have an hour-long meeting. First 20 minutes would be somebody would present something, and then you talk about it and move on. And we instituted a, sort of a guideline that, that live presentation should never happen in a live synchronous meeting. They should record a video prior to the meeting, share it around so everybody can watch it on their own time ahead of the meeting. And then we could shorten the meeting to 30 minutes because now it's just a discussion about the topic, and we all can move on with our days and actually be more productive and effective in that matter. Yeah. So Rahul, I want to turn it over to you now and maybe talk a little bit more about at Designhill how you've seen in terms of being an organization that has been a part of a truly kind of remote culture for many years. How have you seen things evolve over the last 18 months, and what lessons can you share of what worked or what didn't as you were trying to make sure your team stay connected from a meetings perspective over the last 18 months?
Well, with us, Tyler, because see, we have 3 offices. So we have an office in Singapore, we have an office in India, and we had a couple of remote teams in Netherlands and UK. So we guys were already very attuned to working remotely in terms of having meetings over Zoom and all the collaborative tools that are needed. I think what really worked, what we really saw was that when we moved to a completely remote working for all our 140, 150 employees, we saw that the efficiency levels were definitely much better, right? People were getting much more time. They didn't have to travel. They could come in and do whatever they had to do. I really advocate for what Erik was saying. During office, when you have a group of people together, it's obvious, people just start chit-chatting, or if somebody's going out for a smoke, for example, you have 5 others who walk along with them, and you can't track all of that. But I think with all the tools that we have now, for collaboration, like for timekeeping, I think the efficiency levels have been much better throughout. But I still feel, I think a hybrid model, something that we were talking offline, is something that is the way to go, because, with new employees, integrating new employees sort of becomes a very big challenge, because, they don't know the work ethics of different people in your team. They don't know what the culture of the company is, right? And culture is something that sort of gets ingrained over a period of time, and adapting to that. So in the last 1.5 years, we've had about 30-40 people joining the company, and that is the one of the biggest changes that we've seen. That initially there would be an onboarding process, and you'll see people integrating very seamlessly into the culture. But here they've not met each other. In fact, I had not met a lot of the guys who who would be on the meetings. And then it takes time, and so there are pros and cons to this. On one hand, it really improves a lot of efficiency for everybody, comfort for everyone, but at the same time, I do feel that a face-to-face interaction and in-person cohesiveness is important for a work culture.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of general consensus that this hybrid world is where most of us are moving towards, and having a combination of in-person as well as a remote culture overall, but trying to not just react, but to truly kind of adapt to that environment, and saying, what is the new blueprint for a hybrid workplace, and how do we now create new policies, new processes, new best practices, new culture around that, which includes where do meetings work? How do they work? Because I think for a lot of us, there was just sort of the carryover. You alluded to this, Erik, of when we moved to the new world, just the meetings we had are now all virtual. And then many of us have started to figure out, maybe that's not the best way to do it. Because, again, we're having more distributed teams by nature. Zoom fatigue is a real thing, right? If we're on staring at screens, it's very different from being an in-person meeting after in-person meeting. So let's dive a little bit into this idea of this kind of hybrid workplace of the future, and what it means for how we plan and manage and actually run and participate in meetings. Erik, maybe I'll just pass it back to you for just some first thoughts.
Sure.
What did you, so now that you've been through this for a little while, and you're thinking about how do things actually sort of really change in this new world, what ideas or tips do you have in terms of things that you think are important to actually adapting the meeting culture in companies as we move ahead?
Yeah, I think that you have to be careful becoming too transactional, meaning you get on the meeting, you go through the list, you go through the agenda, great, cool, out, next. Remember, you're not walking into a room now, shooting the shit for 5 minutes before the meeting starts, ending and being like, hey, you want to grab a cup of coffee? Like, none of that's happening. So you kind of, again, everything has to be more intentional. I do a weekly lunch with another team on my team, another team at Hawke Media every single week, and rotate it. So it's like every 3 months I meet with the team again, so that we just, the idea is no agenda, hang out, shoot the shit, talk through some craziness, whatever. And so I think those are super important, because if not, you all lose sight of the fact that like these are real people, not just robots, not just for leadership, but I mean for each other. And so finding ways to complement these meetings with some sort of nuance, and that doesn't necessarily mean like another virtual happy hour, but like something that allows for that is super important. I think a lot of it has to do with that intention. I don't think, like, for the productivity side of things, there's no issues here. I don't think there's any issue being productive when it comes to having a meeting, getting the things you need to across, and moving on. I think if that's the goal, this is way more efficient. There's no travel time, there's no bullshit, there's nothing else. It's literally just go. But I think a lot of that stuff by human nature is also needed. So I think that's where the focus comes in moving forward, is if you're going to be remote, and again, there's a billion benefits to it, but you do need to figure out that nuance and that relationship side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point. You're right, because a lot of that, if we're not, again, intentional about having that as part of the culture, then it can easily get lost. And I've seen that over a period where we actually went through that ourselves too, where we found that, geez, it's been 3 months since we actually shot the shit as a team, and we had some fun together, and we, because again, like you said, it used to sort of just come out of those meetings, and some interesting things would happen. And so we started to get disciplined about having dedicated meetings that were actually like team building and relationship building, but then also, as you said, not feeling guilty about the first 5 minutes of a meeting being spent, seeing what's happening, how people spent their weekends, what's happening out there, telling the joke, right?
And I think like things we're looking at is like an annual trip where we bring everyone together. We actually are going to probably end up with a new office in LA that's optional. And we kept our office in New York for the same reason. Our people, again, are all over the place, but at least when they're in town here or there, they can go meet up with people. And we think over time, we may end up opening individual places across the country and world that are just like small places to go hang out as a team. And we're seeing also, back to kind of like the in-person thing, we now have people all over the country that are also traveling themselves. And so we're trying to build some infrastructure around letting them get together. So like we had, funny enough, 2 employees were in a bar in Breckenridge, Colorado, and one of them was wearing a Hawke Media hat. They didn't know each other at all. And one walked up to the other, was like, wait, how do you know Hawke Media? He's like, I work there. How do you know? And I got a selfie with both of them, ended up having drinks together, et cetera. So we're trying to facilitate that more. And that's really where the focus comes. Meetings, all the tools have been there to have meetings virtually. We're doing it right now.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, like trying to make sure you can create those local opportunities for collaboration and connection in this like super distributed environment. It's really, really interesting to think through how we can facilitate that, and then maybe not leave it to chance every time, knowing that where we have pockets of people, we can do more to create those opportunities. Gene, you in the work you're doing oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to add on the hybrid thing. So yeah, one because we were hybrid for a while, and like when you are like have 10 offices, we kind of started thinking about them more like a co-working spaces that the company owns versus the offices. So the idea was like we try to do as much as possible, like if you were working from home, but you socialize with people in those offices. You meet people with like what Erik described, like if you are living in that city, so why don't you go to office and hang out there? But I think the hardest part was like, I think for us, and that's when we were kind of creating teams in the same location. So what those that was resulted in some silos. So when you have like one city and one team is there, so basically they become on their own. So what we try to do instead is basically creating teams to have people from different locations, and it was very helpful. And we've seen it greatly improved our culture, because otherwise, like, you may have people that nobody knows about them, never seen them, never heard about them. So this kind of having cross-location team structure was very helpful for us.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think we actually rebranded our office as our collaboration center, a similar sort of concept to what you're saying, and I think Erik, yours as well, where you've got a smaller footprint and it's intended for people to be able to get together as need be, to collaborate, to work if they need to in a shared space. And in that world, and maybe Rahul, I'll ask you to comment on this first. So if we move to this space where we have, likely there's going to be some people in an office, there may be multiple sort of micro offices where people are at, and then there's going to be a number of others who are at their home offices. So effectively, we've got this distribution, but there could be 8 of the people in one meeting in one physical office and 3 people who are remote. In this new world, what do we need to be mindful of when you think about, like, how do we make sure there's equity in terms of how people are communicating? How do we ensure the remote employees at home don't feel like they're not as connected to the team, the folks who may be in the office? Are there things that you've thought about there, Rahul, or that you've learned in terms of ensuring everybody feels like a connected part of those meetings and sort of on the same playing field?
I think to answer that, I think it boils down to how you're really building your company culture, isn't it? I mean, because if you're allowing your employees to be involved in the whole process, doesn't matter whether they are in one place or they are in multiple places. They need to be involved in what they're doing in the processes. I think that makes a lot of sense, because end of the day, meetings are happening all the time, isn't it? I mean, what else we are doing for their mental well-being, what we're doing as an extracurricular for them. Erik spoke about an annual meeting, an annual vacation, or we're doing co-working spaces. End of the day, I just feel that you as companies, I think we have a responsibility to do more. Apart from the meeting, if we are able to do that, we will be able to integrate our employees much better in the overall workspace. And I think that's really important and key to making sure that everybody is on the same playing field and they feel involved. And it doesn't matter whether they're from home or they're in different clusters around the world.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and maybe something to come off of that, and I'll open it up to anybody who wants to chime in on it. Is there's certainly, I think we all know, an opportunity to also move more and more to an asynchronous work environment, which is a much bigger topic than just meetings. But as we start to empower people and we expect a more distributed workforce, there is an opportunity to reduce our dependency on these live meetings. And that becomes a part of the culture that we're creating, and using more and more asynchronous tools and empowering people to communicate in different ways and collaborate without always requiring everybody getting on the same time zone. So maybe I'll pass it back to you, Rahul. Do you have any sort of perspective or examples of how your team uses more asynchronous? Has that evolved over the last couple of years?
I think with us, especially, because we've always been using a lot of these tools, collaborative tools like Asana and Trello. We have a lot of processes which are already laid down, right? So people know what they have to do, and there's a lot of collaboration that happens across, which is very cross-functional. So it's not necessary for everybody on the same time, right? The projects are aligned. The tasks are very well aligned in different tools, and they're all speaking to each other. So for us, as far as we are concerned, because as long as everybody's on the same page working remotely, we've not seen or faced any issues, and I think all the tools facilitate that now. It's everything's become much more easier with all the technology that we have today.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, where if you have that core stack where people are already able to manage projects, collaborate in different ways, it ends up reducing the ultimate need for a lot of these meetings. Because in the old world, we would meet for a status update on a project. Now it's like, no, it's right. All in Asana. Like, just you're going to know when something is updated, and it reduces that.
In our experience, we were doing async, a lot of async in all the tools that Rahul started. But what happens sometime, over time, that some people become so booked with meetings, so they don't have time for all these tools. So, right. And in order to get attention from them, you have to book meetings. So, and kind of the thought there is, ideally, every person should have some time for asynchronous work in the company. And it's the problem with our calendar is that all of the time is available for meetings. So I think it's a pretty common technique to block out time for meetings. So that's, I think the companies should do more and more at the company scales, where you have only few dedicated blocks of time for meetings, and the rest is for work, either like doing some work or communicating asynchronously. Because otherwise, like, meetings are so efficient that they will consume most of your calendar if you're not careful with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Erik, you could have days where you're on a webinar, then a podcast, then a meeting, then another meeting, then another webinar, and you don't even get time for lunch, right?
It's not that infrequent. I know I mentioned that today, but it does happen quite a bit, because I just book my schedule out and then assume I'll get a break in there somewhere, and sometimes I'm not so lucky. But DoorDash has been a blessing.
You see, that's a great opportunity for them, is integrating into all the calendaring tools that when it detects an overlap in your day, it just auto orders your DoorDash.
I just end up beating on a lot of my Zoom meetings too. It's just like, yep, sorry, lunchtime. You wanted a noon meeting? Here we are.
Well, it is an important topic, because if we buy into this model that more and more our businesses are going to be running remote, it's also going to mean that we're going to have more and more people in different time zones. And it means all of our effective working days start to stretch longer and longer if we want the ability to collaborate people during their native times. And that can cause, again, a lot of challenges in terms of when and how we book meetings, and also being respectful of other people's time zones.
I think that's assuming that you have to have overlap 100%. I think, like, unless you're talking about working with Asian and European teams with American teams all at the same time, like East Coast, West Coast isn't a big deal. Like, 3 hours on either side that you might not have if you're holding the same hours. So a little flexibility maybe, but I don't know that you extend your hours so that you go from 9 to 9, Eastern time and Pacific time. That I don't think that's how you do it. I think it's just, that, like, I noticed that because we have people, again, all over the world, with my team on the East Coast, they're starting at 6 a.m. And I usually start about 7:30. I'm not starting at 6 a.m. And so, I wake up with a few emails in that get going. They don't expect me to respond right away either. And then my Chinese team and our Philippines team actually sometimes accommodates our times, but Chinese, they're starting their day at 5, 6 p.m. our time. And so, sometimes I either get them at the end of the day or I end up with a call at 7, 8 p.m. But that doesn't mean my entire work schedule has gotten extended. It's just once in a while I'll take an evening meeting. So, I don't think it's a giant shift. In fact, I think if people try to do that burnout is going to be terrible. I think it's more about slight adjustments. And again, that whole flexible to be flexible, like if I'm going to take, a 9 p.m. meeting, I may take the next morning off and go do something more recreational. Like I actually work crazy hours, but I'm saying the individuals that work here, I would say it's more about like that balance and not just going all in. I think grinding 15 hours a day is a mistake for most people.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest challenge I know that even I've had is the unintentional aspects of that, which is, much like you said, Rahul, we've hired a lot of people over the last year, and I've realized times I've booked meetings with people I didn't even realize they were in a different time zone than I was, and then all of a sudden now you've got these these nuances of saying, like, when are people available for meetings? And I think there's an opportunity certainly for some innovation to happen here. There's ways that we can manually use the tools today, but I think one of those ideas of just being disciplined about, even as a team culture, and knowing, how it is that people are scheduling meetings. If as part of your culture, you say we need to be blocking off certain times in your schedules for deep work, things like that. Or we could eventually all use tools like Remeet, which I actually just learned about as we started talking, Gene. I would just love to hear your perspective on this idea of meeting efficiency. And without entirely pitching us all on Remeet, tell us about what you're working on, because I think there's some really interesting foundational ideas there.
Yeah, so I think that the big difference from all the other tools and approach to meeting is it's a bit of reverse. So we changed the idea from let's have standing meeting with all the agenda topics. You start from topics, and then we use the time that you have on the intersection for all the discussions. So it's kind of happening in reverse. But it's freeing up so much time, so you actually can have most of your discussion. Like most people that are customers, if they're in leadership roles, they spend 2-3 hours max in our tool. Most other people spend less than an hour, and just because of that efficiency. Because if you analyze every 10, 5, 10, 15 people call with an agenda, you will see that for every topic, you only needed one or few people, and only a couple of people talked. So why all of them had to be there? And especially like when you were, more or less in the same time zone, it's not a big deal. But when you're distributed and have people in Europe and the US, then you time that so precious time on intersection time zone, you rather be somewhere else. But since it's like both of them are half an hour or 1 hour long meetings, you cannot be at the same time in both of them. So, and you end up like wasting time and multitasking. I would say that multitasking is a big thing that kind of become part of our culture. But if you change it from like not meeting and then topics, but topics and then meeting, you will not be joining calls that are irrelevant to you, because somebody will be always intentionally adding you to that call. And it makes a huge difference, because it's like single topic that someone thinks you care about, and you just like, because otherwise like those weekly meetings, they tend to grow, and you may find like 20, 30, 50 people, and you may have like this nice like double, triple booked on your calendar. So this kind of stuff goes away with Remeet, because people basically are not selecting the time for meetings. They just tell when they are available for their meetings, and we do the rest. It's kind of somewhat similar like Calendly, like where you allocate some hours for meetings, but it works like for internal team communication. So where it optimizes and schedules groups call for the whole team.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, I'm looking ahead at a world where I could say, so for me, I've got a meeting block, from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. I'm going to block off 3 days a week my mornings for meetings, and the other time is reserved for deep work and my GSD time, my getting shit done time, and that the system would ensure meetings getting booked with me are getting filled into those spots, and that I'm being taken off of ones I don't need to, or ones that I wouldn't want to be a part of are being recorded so I can watch it, and maybe I'm being reminded during my deep work time that, hey, these 2 meetings you didn't get to, here's the recording of them. And by the way, you can watch them in double speed, so you can skim through.
That's funny you said that, but we have all of that. Right. So and it's kind of one thing that's also kind of different. Like, and one of the big challenges we have with traditional calendars, because they are basically since you do it manually, you kind of have this like first booked, first served idea. So like if you put in the calendar, it's yours. But like imagine like if our backlog of tasks was like managed the same way, like first ticket created, you fix first ticket, right? So we prioritize things. So this kind of opens opportunity to prioritize meetings, and that's what we do. We prioritize them. So the most important stuff happens sooner, and things that like one-on-ones, they usually can wait, and they can get postponed because of that.
Yes. How many times have we all emailed somebody? How important is this in your calendar? I'm trying to book something at that time. Do you think you could move that one? Right? We all play that game all the time. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. Love what you're doing, and I think the concepts are going to be really impactful as we move to these more complex environments and businesses where not everybody's in the same place or the same time zones, and there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah, but some of that can be replicated with our product. So like one thing that we recommend to people who are not yet ready to adopt our product is kind of try to minimize on those like weekly meetings with an agenda, because we kind of believe they evolve, like they're more like kind of office first concepts that transition replicated in the virtual workspace, which doesn't seem makes much sense anymore, because like in the physical office, you had to walk to the conference room, and conference rooms were limited, and it like takes time for people to gather. But in the virtual world, like there's no limit on conference room, and it takes just like a few seconds to join if you're experienced in that. So why don't we just schedule on-demand calls all the time? So that's kind of what we see with people who kind of reach out to us. Most of their calendars are blocked with weekly something. So try to minimize those, and it will be a huge relief for your team. And I know it could be hard initially, but you'll see the difference.
Brilliant. Brilliant. All right, we've got a few minutes left before we want to take some questions from the audience. So for all of you listening, please submit your questions and let us know what's on your mind. Before we get there, I just want to spend a minute talking about external meetings, because we talked a lot, rightfully so, about internal company culture, distributed employees, and how meetings work internally. But we all, as you know, for anybody out there who's an external facing role, executives, business leaders, sales teams, customer service teams, the external meeting challenge is also real. We're now, of course, always distributed from our clients, but many of them are also having the same challenges on their back end of, if you want to get 4 or 5 people from a customer on a call, their team may all also be distributed, and the complexity just continues to build, which is, again, where I think there's a lot of opportunity for much more asynchronous communication as we move forward, as the tools get better. But curious for some of your perspectives on these external meetings and what you've seen in your own sales teams or others over the last 18 months. Have they had to change and adapt the way they connect with external facing people, how they manage meetings, things like that, or has it been business as usual? Rahul, maybe I'll start with yourself.
I mean, with us, as I told you, I mean, all our customers are international. I mean, you know, we serve customers from over 30, 40 countries. So for us, you know, it's pretty much been the same as far as the external teams are concerned. You know, because we've always been using Zoom and Hangouts and Calendly, and those integrations were already in place. Having said that, you know, I mean, the Designhill is one of my businesses, but I also have other businesses that I manage, and there, you know, in fact, I've seen a lot of difference because, you know, I mean, for example, in real estate, you need to have a lot of client-facing meetings with your people, and that is where, you know, you really miss that human interaction, because I feel there is a body language that's you know, that you pick up on when you meet somebody, isn't it? And you know, whether they're comfortable, whether what you know, you tend to pick up on those things. And I think especially when you're trying to close something, you know, having an in-person meeting, at least that's my personal view. I've always found that to be you know, very, very effective. However, these days the best all of us are able to do is with a screen, and so you know, we try to show as much as possible, and I think it's something that, you know, people have adapted to, isn't it? I mean, whether you call it compulsion or you call it necessity, you know, people all over the world have had to make do with this, and nobody's traveling anymore, nobody can go out anymore, so you know, deals have to be done, closes have to be made, and that's how it's being done.
Yeah, I think there's a good opportunity for some innovation here as we move ahead, because you're right, we've kind of reacted to it with taking those in person to video, at least for the basics. But yeah, I think there's some interesting things that can come in the future to support that, because to your point, the importance of that body language, of that personal connection, especially for industries where traditionally it has been you know, face-to-face meetings. The interesting thing, though, that I've seen a lot of research recently come out around this topic of sales teams are, you know, they're all reporting, oh, I can't wait to get back to being able to go to see customers in person. But on the flip side, when you survey customers, they all say, I'm so glad I no longer have to have salespeople in my office, and I hope it stays this way forever. And so despite the fact that salespeople want to meet clients in person, it seems like the clients are more than happy with doing things remotely now. And so I think there is some, you know, some things that we're going to have to be mindful of as we go forward. Erik, anything from your side in terms of your own experience with external interactions and meetings?
Yeah, similar to Rahul, it hasn't changed. We're working so remotely anyways that, like, yes, there were people coming into our office, and that's why we had, like, in LA, we're known, we had this big glamorous office we built out less than a year before COVID hit. But it did help solidify us as a bigger player in our own, you know, sort of our own pond. Yeah. And so people would come by. We had a lot of events and things like that. But for like the individual meetings with companies that want to hire us or companies that are working with us, those were almost always remote, even if they were down the street. It was actually kind of a running joke because we would sometimes lose business because they said they, quote, want to work with a local agency. It's like, half our clients are local. I don't know if we've seen any of them. Like, I don't know what the hell that has to do with anything, but okay. It's this like weird, you know, mental block for people, but it's something we've learned a lot about. And so, yeah, it really didn't affect that much. There were not that many people coming into our office on a regular basis, even though we had all the space for it. So being remote, that's where, like, we didn't miss a beat.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of a, you know, when we think about how important it was to have like the video infrastructure this year, you know, if from a business perspective, you know, if the pandemic had happened and we weren't ready to turn on webcams and do video streaming and have tools like Zoom, it would have been a very different year for a lot of businesses. But we're starting to take it for granted now in a good way that, you know, we're now at a point where we can hit the on button. We've all got used to webcams. We can all get on video calls. Tools are there to be able to record and send videos to people offline that they can keep sort of hearing from us and seeing our faces. So it's interesting to reflect on that and think how far things came in order to set this baseline. But at the same time, it's you know, still feels like we're just at the beginning of creating these experiences, these meeting experiences that almost start to feel like we're back in person, because it still doesn't quite feel like it here. Yeah, we're almost there. But there's you know, some interesting things I see coming down the line to make these experiences even more engaging. We're at about the 15-minute mark before the end of the time here. I just wanted to pause and invite Mike back on to see if we have any questions from the audience that we want to take at this time. And if not, we'll keep moving. But if so, please drop them in. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. Hey, guys, been enjoying the conversation. We've got a couple of questions coming in. The first one is, how do you face people who have gone into, quote, automatic or robot mode, and they don't want to invest in this time for relationship building?
I guess, is it leadership or is it an individual contributor would be super important?
It's probably, I would say, if you can talk about like an individual contributor.
Yeah, some people are introverts and don't want that relationship and they want to just be a robot. I don't think you can pressure everyone into wanting to build relationships. My own view.
Yeah.
Well, I think you don't have to, like, can't be forceful like
right.
So just like you cannot force, just try, don't, but you can may come up with things that may excite them and they will join. Yeah.
I think for if it's a leader, then I think it's a different story, because if it's someone leading a team, like, that's part of being a leader is you have to be social and not be a robot, and they need to learn and adapt, and you have to train them in that way.
There's been some interesting related just analysis and research that I've seen around as we head into this kind of, you know, distributed workforce. These opportunities for more asynchronous communications as well are also, I think, on the flip side, actually opening up new opportunities for people who tend to be a more introverted personality. Whereas in the traditional in-office world, you know, big external personalities would often take over. We all know, we've been in those meetings where the loudest voice in the room controls the conversation. But in the virtual distributed environment, there's a little bit of that equalizing, I think, that's happening. And it's, again, as you move more and more, part of it is the virtual piece, and part of it is the asynchronous versus synchronous, and saying, hey, if we can make decisions a little bit more of a distributed way, let all the voices come to the table and contribute. Actually, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of folks who are more introverted to really shine in their businesses, because they're not going to be as dependent on those live meetings. And I think that's good for business. I think it's very good for business in the future.
We've got two that are kind of similar. One out of all the questions coming in, one's talking about how do you find the use of async and sync activities as a combination to achieve work, and then the other one talks about what happens if you're still going into the office for 2 to 3 days per week, but you end up going to the office just to have video calls, right? So you're literally, you know, trying to, you know, work remotely async, but you're still, you know, synchronously going to a location. Any thoughts from you all on that?
I think when it comes to, you know, coming in 3 days a week, I think it's probably down to how the companies are really structuring this kind of a hybrid model, isn't it? I mean, I wouldn't really recommend anybody to go in 3 days a week and then not go 3 days a week. Probably you can do once a week and then, you know, have all the teams coming in. At least that team, you know, say, for example, the way we did it was we had a marketing team come in 1 week, and for 3 weeks they were all work from home. So, you know, at least because we know the maximum communication that they're going to have is with each other, isn't it? Or the teams that they collaborate with. So the content and the market, social media and SEO. So they're all coming in together. The development team was coming in together for 1 week. So I think there is a way you can sort of, you know, optimize that interaction. Obviously, I would believe that it would be like slightly, you know, foolish to call people to office and then have them on virtual meetings all day long. I mean, you know, it's just making them spend more time traveling.
On the broader topic of async versus sync, I'm curious for the panelists as well of, you know, what are some of the most common tools you're using for asynchronous communication, and then do you have like formal ideas or structures around when to use async versus a synchronous meeting, or if you follow any typical patterns or best practices there? Gene, do you any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think the only thing that ever worked is when we had kind of a limit on synchronous communication, because like if you always like, I don't know, like if you have a problem and that problem is very important to you, you find in like the most efficient way for you to solve it, not for the whole company. So, and when there is no limit on the calendar for all your meetings, then you would just like schedule a meeting. And some people will end up scheduling meetings all the time for every problem they have. So, and the only way out of that is just having some limit on meetings and have more time for asynchronous communication, and then it kind of somehow kind of balances itself. But otherwise, like meetings will always consume the asynchronous work if you don't have limits and you don't enforce them somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that comes back to empowering, enabling, and even like training people on how to use asynchronous tools in richer ways. Because I think there is, for a lot of us, like those of us who are just in the thick of it, we're executives, we're tech people, you know, we get it, and we're like, of course I use Slack and this and that, and that's just a part of the way I do things. But I think for our broader base of employees, we sometimes take for granted, you know, how immersed they are in some of these different tools. And I do think as we move ahead, there's going to be more and more of that, of like, how do we build up the competency of our teams to be experts in using different asynchronous time management tools, collaboration tools, communication tools. And yeah, it's everything from the Asanas and others for doing project management, the Slacks of the world for, you know, asynchronous collaboration. You know, there's document suites. There's, you know, recording asynchronous videos and sharing instead of getting on a live video call.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I like this kind of, the idea of asynchronous videos. It's kind of the same, basically you can reduce the number of meetings, but you can also make them less expensive. So the least expensive way to have a meeting is to have a synchronous meeting, right? But then the next step would be to have meetings with just 2 people for 10 minutes, right? That will be the next step after that. And if you just focus on like reducing the cost of the meetings, in addition to spending more time in asynchronous tools where it's possible, where it's more efficient, that would be also like a good way to improve the communication in the company.
Hey there, Gene. We actually have a question that came in for you.
Sure.
It's one of the assertions of Remeet is that meetings should have only one topic. They'd love to hear more about this because they're struggling with thinking about how to convince clients to adopt this strategy.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that that wasn't for externally, kind of like if you salesperson, like you probably don't want to like convince customers, but if you are talking like you're maybe like a freelancer and your like customers hired you, so in that context, in the context of the team, and one way to think about that is similar like how you think about tasks and splitting tasks. Like we had like the idea of big user story or big task, and we have subtasks. So it's kind of the same reasoning can be applied here. So why would we like do everything at once, where half of that is high importance and another half is less important? So why would we do it all now? We can instead just discuss most important, break it down, discuss most important, and less important will happen later. And in additional benefit is that when you break it down, you might not need whole team working on that, right? So you can assign individual subgroups of people to discuss those individual topics. And that's already happening because we already know the topics who need to discuss them, like who needs to be there. So we don't really have to work hard on that. We just break agenda on separate meetings and we are done pretty much. So we have a whole white paper on that on our website, so you can check it. It doesn't require email, so you can just go and read it.
Terrific. Yeah, it's interesting as you start to think about those single topic meetings and almost this idea of like micro meetings, as opposed to the, hey, let's get 15 people in the room for 30 minutes. And most people are just multitasking for most of that time anyways. But it's a totally different model from how we grew up in the business world.
But it's really like, it's really natural because like what you will see like 1 hour, you will discuss like 5-10 topics in 1 hour. So like we can do that. Why can't we just like have a separate meeting for each of them? Like there is no limitation. People may think it's like the 5-10 minutes meeting is crazy idea, like off our meeting half an hour and 60 minutes, but that's really not an issue.
It was crazy when you had to book meeting rooms and walk across the office.
Exactly.
But now when it's like, boom, I click a button and I'm over here in this other group now, it is much more of a reality. You're right. It's interesting.
No, I will say, I think that there's so much more benefit than cost to this, you know, sort of new normal, the new paradigm here. And my business partner always wanted a remote company. I was always resistant to it. And so this obviously forced my hand. And now I've told them, I'm like, you were right. Like I was always worried about employees rising to the occasion. Like, do they need monitoring? Do they need management like in that way? The answer is no. Like set up your company to be more objective and subjective, and you're probably going to manage people better because now like we highlight employees that are getting like great ratings from clients because now we couldn't see when a client was angry. We couldn't be sitting over their shoulder. So we had to put all these things in place to monitor the outcomes that we wanted, not monitor their workload because we don't care. We care about the outcome, but now we can manage to those outcomes, which allows a lot more objective management, which has created a lot better environment for promoting the people that should be, or meeting with the people that I should be, because before it might be we'd gravitate towards the more friendly or social person. Now it's the performer.
Yeah. All right, we've got just a couple minutes left to wrap it up. I got one final question for all of you for some parting words. Before we do that, though, Rahul, I just wanted to ask you to spend a minute talking about your experience. You had mentioned that you've built up a small organization called Mission Oxygen for the work that you're doing in India. And as part of that, having to spin up a team of folks, a distributed team in a matter of days or weeks, and running it as a remote organization. Can you just share a little bit about your experience there? And again, sort of what you learned in building up a distributed team very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, Tyler, to be very honest with you, I mean, today is like the 28th day since we started this. And in that much time, I think we're about 25, 30 entrepreneurs, all in different parts of the world. And we've basically built a startup in a way that we've built a complete supply chain, logistics from US to China to India, pan-India distribution. We procured 6,000 oxygen concentrators. We've set up 32 oxygen plants, and we've distributed all of these to more than 200 hospitals across 22 states. And we didn't have a clue. I mean, I'm not into this line of work. I don't know. I didn't even know how to import any or export anything, right? And we've done all of that. We've raised $10 million and we've spent $12 million. We put in our own money, and all of this in 28 days. And that everything has been done remotely. And to be very, very honest with you, so we all of us guys, we were on a group, it was startup founders. So we were just on a group, and it was just a thought that, we wanted to do something. And none of us had met each other. None of us actually, most of us didn't even know what we did. We knew our companies, but we'd never seen each other face to face. And we've done the entire thing remotely. We've probably, I don't want to say this, but in these 28 days, we must have saved about 20 to 25,000 lives just by, doing what we've done. And everything's remotely done. We're doing this 20 hours a day. People are in China, in factories, in Hong Kong, in Guangzhou, in US, on West Coast. Flexport is a logistics company, and we're working with people in 3-4 time zones. And it's incredible. And I think we're basically able to do this. We are able to do this only because remote working is possible, isn't it? I mean, people were so used to working on tools, on communication tools, messaging tools. And because all of us were founders and business owners, we sort of, picked our own expertise, and everybody took ownership of different elements of what we were doing. And it just sort of worked out. And, it's incredible that if you just think about it, like, we've had the support of, from all over the world. Like, we've raised $10 million in 28 days from nothing, and we've spent more than that already. So remote working, I'm a big advocate. I've always been a big advocate of this. And it's only goes to show that when, people align, things can be possible.
It's amazing. I can't think of a more inspirational story to end this on in terms of how you built that up. Congratulations, and very, very, very impressive. And thank you to you and the team for putting that level of investment in. Can't underestimate how much work that must have been, but it is inspiring to think about what we can accomplish in a matter of days when we embrace these mindsets and use the technology to our advantage. So very, very impressive. With that, I think we're right about at time here. I'm just going to ask each of our panelists, if I could, Mike, for a parting word or a few words on this topic. Would just love to hear very quickly from each of you one quick note on what you're most excited about for the future of meetings and the future of work as we head into this hybrid space. Erik, what are you most excited about?
I just think, like anything, lean into change. Don't get scared and lean away from it. There's so many things to take advantage of. It's a countless list of things that are great benefits of doing this that you've now got the excuse to do. So lean into it. That's it.
Lean into it. Gene, what about you?
Yeah, try not to get into extremes like eliminating something that didn't work. Try to like rethink. Maybe there are other approaches, because there are a lot of talk about like, let's kill that, it didn't work, but extremes rarely work. So try to find a good balance with everything you try to change.
All right, lean into it, but not too extremely. And Rahul?
I just feel that, people shouldn't get into a fatigue situation. So I just feel that, there needs to be a work-life balance, even with screens and Zoom calls. I think that's really important. And so going forward, because this is something which is going to stay, right? Remote working is going to stay, and people are going to do business this way. So companies need to find a way to balance that. And I think that's really important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the panelists. Absolutely fantastic conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And Mike, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Thank you all for joining us for this session.